over a few housekeeping items. Today's session will last for about 45 minutes, and that includes an audience Q&A at the end of the presentation. Additionally, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send everyone a link to download the recording after today's live session. We also encourage all of our attendees to ask some questions throughout the presentation. To do so, please use the question function that you should see on your screen via the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so moving along, for over 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 100 countries, has grown 37% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. And today I'm excited to introduce our two main presenters. First, Dick Burke, the Chief Executive Officer here at Envoy Global, and Manu Sivanandam, the Chief Operating Officer, also at Envoy Global. DB and Manu, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Eric, for the kind introduction, and thank you others for dialing in on a very unique period in our country's history. Can everyone hear, Eric, can you hear me okay? I want to make certain folks can hear me all right.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear, and yes, no, DB, exactly. These are very extraordinary times, and just so our attendees are aware, all three of us are currently remote. This is our actually very first all remote webinar that we're doing. So just hopefully nothing happens, but just so our attendees, in case there are audio dropouts or anything along, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does, just please excuse any technical difficulties.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. And again, thank you for joining us. Delighted to have you join us today in the midst of such unsettling days across the globe. A couple points on COVID-19 before we dive into today's presentation. First and foremost, we express our concern and sympathies for those who are suffering. So we thinking of you and hope you and your families and your loved ones are managing and in good health. Secondly, we're open for business in many regards. This type of climate is what we were built for. The combination of powerful lawyering augmented by leading technology. It has not been particularly difficult for us to migrate to a entirely remote, out of office setup. There's so much going on in the world. We're trying to continue our practice of thoughtful, timely, and informed thought leadership that extends to what's happening right now. Three resources. First and foremost, if you go to our website, www.envoyglobal.com, we've got a new section. You'll see our COVID-19 Resource Center. We are constantly updating it. I encourage you to check it out. There is so much uncertainty about how the virus is impacting global mobility and immigration. Good information there. Number two, we're hosting our first webinar. I hope it's our last. I fear it will not be our last. Regarding COVID-19. That is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central Time, hosted by Sarah Herbeck. Sarah Herbeck is the managing partner of Global Immigration Associates, our affiliated law firm. Sarah brings close to 20 years experience in the world of immigration. Very intelligent, very experienced, very thoughtful. She will lead a very timely presentation tomorrow. Once again, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. You can sign up for that on our website, www.envoyglobal.com. And then fifth and finally, if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to consider signing up for updates on our website. This year was already quite unique amongst the last 5 or 6 for how dynamic the immigration landscape was. It is made all the more so by everything going on in the last month or so due to COVID-19. So I certainly encourage you to go to the website www.envoyglobal and sign up for our updates. With that, I'd draw your attention to a little bit of information about the data we're going to present today about the report. This is our 5th year of doing this. We believe that in such uncertain times, data brings power, brings knowledge. One of the ways we bring that to you is through our annual Immigration Trend Survey. We do this in association with Harris Group, the former Nielsen. This is third-party research. We go out to over 400 HR professionals across the country, from Canadian border to the Mexican border, Atlantic to the Pacific, surveying the largest companies all the way down to the smallest. So we get a very representative sampling, attempting to provide valuable benchmarking information for folks involved in global mobility, and to give you a real sense of the gestalt, if you will, around all things immigration and global mobility. Due to, I think, the quality of the data, the breadth of our reach, and our utilization of Harris and the timeliness, we get very good pickups, as you can imagine. Just last year, we were at NPR, Politico, Forbes, Recode, Axios, TechCrunch, many of the leading newspapers in the country. And we're delighted today to share with you the 6 key themes that we believe emerged from our 5th annual Immigration Trend Survey, the 2020 survey. So with that, I think we can flip to the next page. I'll quickly introduce those 6 themes. I'll handle the first 2 and then hand it over to Manu Sivanandam, our COO, to present on the final 4. Number 1, demand for global talent is rising. These survey questions were posed and answered in late December of last year. No one had any awareness of the situation would be in. But as of Q4 and through Q1, through January, demand for global talent rising. We'll take a few looks at that. Number 2, government scrutiny remains high. That is not news to anybody on this call. You can view that through the lens of the increase in RFEs, case denials, site visits, etc. Not sort of surprise to you, headline number 2. Number 3, because of the dynamic times we're living in, the heightened government scrutiny, and the tightness of the job market, green card sponsorship is up, and Manu will share with you some interesting insights about that. Number 4, not surprisingly, the 2020 presidential election could impact immigration. There is a fairly material difference in this election between the 2 candidates, even regarding employment-based immigration. Manu will cover that. 5th, dramatic increase in global assignments. Again, this will be impacted by COVID-19, but a host of factors were contributing to continued growth in the utilization of global assignments for various reasons. Manu will outline that. 6th and finally, and segueing from number 5, Canada's immigration policies remain quite attractive to employers. Very interesting statistics about the number of companies either already there or going there, and the reasons for that. So those are 6 of the emerging trends from the survey. We'll like to walk you through each of these in slightly greater depth right now. So flipping page to the next page, demand for global talent. As I said a moment ago, one more page, Eric, if we could. There we go. Demand remains quite high as the skills gap persists. We know that at the highest level, the unemployment rate up to a few weeks ago was at 50-year lows. We know that there were more job openings in the United States than job seekers. We know that the problem was only even more acute when it came to high-skilled STEM employees. We knew in many markets, take healthcare as an example, certain leading cities in the country have 10 open positions for every qualified employee. So skills gap persists, labor market exceedingly competitive, negative unemployment for STEM talent. And also, companies we find are increasingly seeing the value of a diverse workforce, and that's not just for the ethical reasons, which are important and noteworthy, but also for the myriad viewpoints, experience sets that they present. That's we think one of the other drivers for the demand for global talent. So switching forward, the first of our survey questions was, during the next year, do you expect your company's foreign national headcount to increase, those two darker shaded purple colors, remain the same, the light purple, or decrease, the blue shades? And as you can see, in 2017 and 2018, those expecting either remain the same or increase 85, 86%. We saw in 2019 a bit of a contraction down to 80%. We think that was probably caused by folks beginning to question whether the process was becoming too difficult and perhaps warranting a more contracted view of the role of immigration. This year, a reversion to the norm of 85, 86%. And we think it's not that the government made things easier, it's just that the labor market got tighter and the demand for foreign talent became more acute, and the desire and perception amongst employers that there are growth opportunities out there if we can hire the best talent. One other thing I'd point out on this slide, if you compare in the 2020 column, the far right, the percentage of respondents who expect an increase, those top two bars, that is 53%. That is 4x those who expect a decrease, the two blue bars, comparing 53% the top two, 14% the bottom two, by a tune of 4-to-1 virtually. You're expecting employers to see their foreign national headcount to increase or decrease. The next slide is how important is sourcing foreign national employees to your strategy, closely aligned with the preceding question. And here you can see, again, by a tune of 90% plus for the fourth year in a row, employers across the country telling us that sourcing foreign nationals, and we'll get into the reasons in a moment, that sourcing foreign nationals is either somewhat important, very important, or extremely important to their hiring strategy. I guess it's not a surprise, but there aren't many survey questions you will pose where 4 years in a row you'll get 90% plus, speaking to the value that foreign nationals are perceived to bring to employers, and again, the macro reality of a need for more STEM talent. The last slide we'll share with you on this particular one of our 6 themes is, what's the primary source or reason for that growth? 90+% are, 53% are expecting growth. 90% plus say it's foreign nationals are important. What are the reasons for that? Perhaps not that surprising. 50%, basically from about 4 o'clock there to maybe 10 or 11 o'clock. That's to either fill open high-skilled positions, 38% of the reason for the growth in U.S. immigration, 12% for lower skilled, equaling 50%. One point there, so often, and we think mistakenly, folks think of foreign national talent for just high skilled. We're seeing many of our clients come to us and ask if we can help them use foreign national talent to fill low skilled talent. We have a very compelling product that does that through the EB3 visa program. If you're interested in that, let us know. 40% of the respondents in Figure 4 say we want to get a more diverse workforce. We believe diversity, whether that's of gender, of country of birth, of citizenship, of sexual orientation, provides numerous benefits, differences of perspective, of experience, cultural familiarity, and there's real value in that. 9% say we're using it as a retention or promotional tool for those we already have. I suspect those joining us on the phone would come to similar conclusions. 40% seeking diversity, and half to seeking to fill open high-skilled or non-high skilled positions. Headline number 2, I want to talk about the immigration process. Two more slides, if you would, Eric. One more, if you could. Our second finding from the 2020 Immigration Trend Survey, doubtful comes as a surprise to any of you if you spend much time in the world of immigration, and that is the government scrutiny over immigration remains very high, with employers most challenged by 3 things. Number 1, a lack of efficiency, a lack of transparency, and a imbalance between supply and demand. Envoy, one of our guiding principles has always been, against that backdrop of slow processing times and opacity, it's on us to do all we can to make our portion of the process as easy, as expedient, and as transparent as possible. And you'll see in these next few slides that the perception of opacity and lack of efficiency and insufficient availability persists. So on the next page,
hey,
slide
DB,
yes.
Hey, DB, we got 2 quick questions from the audience that I think you just really quickly. The first question is, can you go over again when the survey was conducted? It was before the current COVID-19 outbreak, correct?
That is correct. We go out, we work in the fall to refine the questions, and then Harris, the third-party research group that we utilize, goes out in the second half of December.
Gotcha. And then the second question from this attendee is, can you, who is answering the survey? HR departments? Is it like chief people officers, chief hiring officers?
Certainly, excellent question. Approximately half of the 420 respondents are are folks in HR or talent acquisition. The other half are hiring managers. We deliberately want to get both sides and both perspectives represented here. So think of it as half hiring managers, half HR practitioners.
Great. Great, thank you. And let's head back. So I'll advance the slide.
Great. So I think we're exactly on slide 13. The question was, under the current administration, we're now in starting year 4, has your company's visa application process become less difficult, more difficult, or has it stayed the same? And not surprisingly, only 16% of employers said the process had become less difficult under the current administration. About 45% believe it had stayed the same. About 38% believe it's more difficult. So by a tune of maybe 2.5 to 1, a little more, right about 2.5 to 1, folks are finding the process in the current administration more difficult, and that can be, I think, reflected by or caused by the doubling of RFEs, a quadrupling, we know, of case denials nationally, increase in site visits, and I would argue a perception amongst practitioners voiced frequently by AILA of seemingly inconsistent and occasionally capricious decision making is what we hear from those we serve, those 1,000+ customers, and from industry events that we are a part of. The next slide tried to take a deeper dive. What are some of those pain points? And we've alluded to some already. You can see uncertainty of outcome has grown from 35% to 41%. I think that is what I was alluding to when I mentioned seemingly inconsistent adjudication. Rise in denials. In the old days, we didn't ask about that because denials were relatively infrequent, particularly with strong cases and strong lawyering. It has become so much a part of the landscape now. Unfortunately, we felt we had to ask, and sure enough, it came in second place. It's the second biggest pain point, 38% citing that rise in denials. A third, this one's more of a perennial, a lack of transparency, but you can see an increase though from 22% to 34%. That's over a 50% increase in just a mere period of 2 years. A lack of transparency. We take that and say, okay, what can we do to drive transparency, both in enabling our attorneys to be available to both HR and to the foreign nationals, and in having our platform provide some transparency. Last, the increase in foreign national anxiety, not a surprise to anyone who practices on a daily basis. We try to bring real empathy to the foreign nationals we serve. Getting back to the point of diversity, I'm delighted that we've, we're in the double digits in terms of employees, my colleagues who are foreign nationals, who have walked that walk, who understand the criticality of the process, the nerve-wracking elements of the process, and from that we try to allay anxiety through responsiveness and professionalism. Manu, who will be taking over in a moment, is in fact himself a foreign national, and he brings wonderful experience to what that process was like, and how can we create a better process for those we serve than what he experienced years ago. Regrettably, this figure 7 could have gone on longer with pain points, but these were the 4 that were cited most often. Flipping to the next page, what would be those changes? We asked, what items would you most like to see the government to change? Quite a bit of information here, but you'll see we've been able to bucket it into 3 areas. One is speed, as we alluded to. 95% expressed some dissatisfaction in speed. They'd like quicker processing times by USCIS. Just yesterday, not surprisingly, the government took out, postponed premium processing for cap cases. Second big response under speed, allow more expedited filing. Second large bucket of focus and requests for improvement around transparency, with 96%, the single biggest response among all these answers, 96% asking that the foreign national have better insight into case processing, case initiatives. How many times does the foreign national come to you seeking a status update? 95% asking that you, the HR professional, have greater insight. And then the third most frequent bucket was availability. We wish there were more options. We see what Canada's doing. Why can't we have the same thing in the United States? We wish that the green card process was amended so that folks from certain foreign countries, namely India and China, did not have such long waits to go through the green card process. And then third and finally, why can't we increase the number of H-1Bs? Longtime practitioners will remember that in the early aughts, the H-1B number was more than 2x what it is now. And with a labor market like it is now, and a avowed desire to see GDP growth increase dramatically, can we consider an increase in H-1Bs? Whatever that is, the 7th or 8th most common one was the lowering of the RFE rate, which has doubled in the past few years. One last question, one last response I want to share with you about government scrutiny. This one actually yielded favorable reviews for the government. Flipping to page 16, you'll recall that in the last year, the government flipped the order of the H-1B process to favor those who have a master's degree. The Trump administration has said, to the extent we are seeking immigrants, we seek the best and the brightest. One way they sought to implement that was through the changing the order in last year's H-1B lottery to favor those with master's degrees. We found that our clients, the 1,000+ customers that we represent, to the extent they were what I'll call operating companies, companies that would produce things for themselves, they were generally happy with that because they would tend to hire master's candidates. Those customers and clients and other entities that serve more as consultancies, sourcing foreign national talent to operating companies, less satisfied with it because they, in general, not exclusively, but in general, favor candidates with master's degrees. And you can see here that the recent change was reviewed favorably by 50% by respondents. Only 19% felt there was a negative impact. So by about 2.5 to 1, folks like that change from change in policy from the government. So with that, I'll quickly hand it off to Manu who will review the 4 remaining headlines.
Great, thank you, Dick. Just checking everyone can hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you, Manu.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay, that's off to a good start. Excellent. Well, so as Dick mentioned, I'm going to go through the remaining 4 sections we were going to highlight here. And so we'll start with green cards, and then we'll then move on to the election, and then we'll end on global and Canada. So in this first section, if we just turn to the next page, Eric, we asked employers about green card sponsorship. And really what we found here was a pretty stark takeaway on 2 fronts. The first is that employers are sponsoring more foreign nationals for green cards than we've seen really since we started doing the Immigration Trend Survey. And we found that employers are also starting the process much earlier from when the employee starts. And we'll just go through both of those findings. So the next slide, on slide 19, you'll see here this chart. In this chart, we asked employers, have you ever sponsored an employee for a green card? And you'll see here that a meaningful uptick here from 66% of employers or respondents to the survey said yes last year to now 71% said yes, they've sponsored a foreign national for a green card. And if we flip to page 20, the really sort of key find that really stuck out to us was not only have slightly more employers sponsored employees for a green card, they're starting much earlier in the process. And so this chart shows when we asked employers, when does your company typically start the green card process for your foreign national employees? And you can see, for example, that last year in 2019, when we asked the survey, about 2/3, 66%, said they start the green card within the first year. About 28% do within after 3 years of service, and about 3% do after 5 years of service. And if you contrast that to the survey that we ran this year, you'll see a really big increase, where now almost 4 in 5, just over 4 in 5 employers, 81%, start the green card in the first year. And so a really big increase in employers starting that process earlier, which we think in many respects reflects the competitive nature of that policy, and employees really looking for employers that are willing to start that process earlier. And if we slice that further, we slice that 81% down, and we get a lot of clients who ask, well, what does the first year mean? Does it mean straight away? Does it mean after 3 months? And so we asked that question. And if you break down the 81%, and you see this in the pie chart on the right-hand side, you'll see that just over a quarter, so 26% in total, actually start the green card immediately. So basically, upon hire, a further 20% within 3 months, 18% after 6 months, and 17% after a year, or I guess between 6 months and a year. So you can actually see that not only are more people starting the green card earlier, i.e. within the first year, actually almost half of employers are starting it within 3 months. So really rapid start to the process. And a lot of our clients find it really useful. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, Manu, I was just going to say, we just got a question from the audience, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So just the question is, are there particular industries that tend to sponsor more / earlier green card relative to others? And DB, feel free to hop on as well.
Yes, we definitely see that. We see it both by industry and by geography. So we certainly see that tech companies in the tech sector, whether it's B2C or B2B, tend to start the green card process earlier. And we see that companies based in the San Francisco area or based in on the East Coast tend to start the process earlier. And so, we suspect obviously that reflects the competitive nature of talent in those geographies and in those industries. That said, we do see this apply really across the board. So across all geographies, across all industries, the companies are starting the green card process at a pretty early stage. And if there are attendees out there today who would like to see some of those slices in terms of by geography and by industry, just let us know and contact us, and we'll be happy to slice the data where we're able to do so and provide that further level of insight for you. Okay, and what I would say,
thank you. And, go ahead. Yeah, good. Yeah, no, thanks for answering the question, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great. And so and that actually brings up a good point. One of the things we find also with this immigration trend survey, and in particular information like this, is it can be very useful data to share more broadly within your organization, perhaps with hiring managers or perhaps with particular business stakeholders who are curious to understand, well, what are other companies doing? What's typical policy? We know green cards can be an expensive process, and this is a way of getting a sense of what are other companies doing when it comes to these sorts of policies. So that's the green card process. So just shifting gear, we also asked respondents how they felt about certain government policy proposals. And so, as referenced earlier, we've seen a lot of changes in the last few years, whether it's been RFEs and denial rates, the new H1B cap lottery process that obviously many of you are going through this very second, most recently public charge changes. But outside of those, we're also seeing a number of proposals that have come up, whether it's from the administration or from policymakers or from think tanks. And a lot of these pertain to high school immigration. So we wanted to share a couple of those and how response in our survey thought about some of those policy proposals. And so the first one relates to the Fairness in High School Immigration Act. And for those who are not familiar with this, essentially, currently, as many of you probably know, but for those less familiar, there is a per country limit on employment-based green cards. And so I think it's about 7% can go to any one country. And as a result, there's a high backlog for certain countries, for example, for applicants who have a Chinese or Indian background. The Fairness and High Skills Act would propose to change that and would largely remove those per country limits. And so for some countries, that would obviously, for some individuals from some countries, that would obviously be beneficial. But for others, it wouldn't be beneficial because it would actually create a longer wait than exists today. So we asked employers how this would impact their business. And what's interesting is we found that actually feelings were pretty mixed. So while 36%, while the largest slice of respondents said that it would make hiring and retaining foreign nationals easier, you'll see that actually a pretty similar number, 31%, thought it would actually make it more difficult, and then 25% thought it would have no impact. And so pretty mixed feelings on this. And this one is something that's currently stalled, and so we don't see a particularly clear path to pass in the imminent future, but definitely something that's currently on the radar. Another policy proposal that's come up, or came up, I guess, a few months ago on the next slide, is around changing the allocation of employment-based visas in such a way that it would encourage foreign nationals to, or incentivize them to consider working not just in the traditional East Coast and West Coast hubs, but elsewhere. An example of this policy proposal actually was called the Heartland Visa, and was proposed by a think tank called the EIG, which is a think tank founded by Sean Parker of Facebook fame. And so the question we asked employers was just that, would you support the creation of a new visa that would encourage foreign nationals to consider working outside of traditional East and West Coast hubs? And this one we actually found met a lot of support. So you can see there in blue, overwhelming support for this proposal. 71% would support something like this. And this could obviously take a number of different forms in terms of either the allocation of visas or particular incentives to companies who hire foreign nationals outside of the coast. And the goal here being really to help those local economies that perhaps haven't got such a strong technology or STEM talent base, and maybe more struggling, or maybe struggling also even with demographics as well. So interesting to see that level of support for this proposal. And then the third and final proposal we asked about on the next slide, on slide 25, was around DACA. And this one has obviously been in the news a lot. We know that there's some 800,000 individuals who are beneficiaries of DACA. And what we asked here, though, which I think is a little bit different to perhaps what you see in the news, is we asked about the impact ending DACA would have on high-skilled employees, non-high-skilled employees, and overall. So we really broke it down. And what we thought was really fascinating here is you can see that 41% of respondents, so 4 out of 10, thought that it would actually impact the work authorization of a large portion of their high-skilled employees. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost in the discussion here around DACA is the fact that actually it affects not just sort of non-high-skilled or less high-skilled roles, but actually it can really affect an end of DACA could actually really affect employers more significantly across all the different types of roles that they have. Great, so that's on policies. Our final two sections here are on global immigration. The first is on global overall, and then we'll dive a little bit more deeply into Canada, which has definitely got a lot of interest, as did a little bit last year as well. So just moving to slide, maybe moving to slide 28. So we asked employers, what's driving your outbound immigration? In other words, your non-US assignments. And what's really interesting here, as you'll see here, is that just under half, 48%, said that the primary driver for their outbound immigration assignments is actually placing high-skilled talent they were unable to secure work authorization for in the US. In other words, sort of parking foreign nationals or putting foreign nationals where they couldn't get a H-1B, perhaps they were unsuccessful in the lottery or other issues, and finding places for them in other locations. So a really interesting finding there. And that of course is the number one reason there that we saw people seeking non-US assignments. And then outside of that, of course, you have the traditional factors like expanding in new locations, specific projects, training, so on and so forth. And the last one at the very end, just to call that one out, which got picked up by 31% of respondents, was rotation programs. And we've seen this ourselves among our client base. We serve over 1,000 clients, ranging from high growth tech companies through to Fortune 50 companies. And we find many are looking at really stepping up their rotational programs to provide employees the opportunity to work in other locations, and not just the traditional senior executive placements, but also earlier tenure employees as well. So the next slide, we dug a little bit deeper into how different policies are changing around the world when it comes to, is immigration becoming easier or harder? And so on this slide, you'll see here for these different countries, the bars in blue represent employers who thought that the process has become easier. The light blue shows noticeable change, and the orange shows it's become harder. And what you can see, first of all, of course, is that over half of respondents felt that Canada has become easier in the last 2 years. And we'll speak to that actually in more detail in the next couple of slides coming up. You'll see also the UK, people are seeing becoming a little easier, and that may become even more so. As you may well have seen, about a month and a half ago, the Migration Advisory Committee in the UK, MAC, published further details on their points-based system that will be coming out shortly. And on the reverse side, you can see some countries where immigration has become harder, Saudi Arabia, China, Hong Kong, for example. So this gives you just an interesting perspective of what employers are seeing around the world when it comes to immigration policies for their employees. So as I mentioned, we then dug a little bit deeper into Canada. And for those who are not as familiar with some of the changes going on in Canada, Canada has set itself a stated government policy to really encourage high-skilled immigration. I believe they have a goal of wanting to attract 1 million high-skilled immigrants over the next few years. And in addition to having this goal, they've actually also created a fast-track system for high school immigrants called the Global Talent Stream. And that can help employers hire foreign talent in a matter of weeks. And they're almost positioning this at the government level as a sort of competitive alternative to the H-1B in a bid to try and make places like Toronto and Vancouver really big tech hubs in Canada. And so we asked a few questions about Canada. And on slide 32, what you'll see here is even over last year, a stark interest in the number of companies who are actively considering Canada for their expansion. So 51% of respondents, compared to 38% last year, said they're considering Canada for their company's expansion. So a pretty significant increase in just a year. And then you can see that you already have 16% who already have at least one office in Canada. And so we then asked, okay, so considering it, what are you actually doing about it in terms of sending employees to Canada? And so on the next slide, on this slide here, we asked employees, well, are you sending more people to and hiring more foreign nationals in Canada? And you can see here that on that first slide, that 40%, 4 out of 10, are sending more people and hiring more foreign nationals in Canada. So again, a continued slight increase there in the number of employers who are sending individuals or hiring foreign nationals in Canada. And as I mentioned earlier, part of the reason for that, we think, is because of Canada's immigration policy, and in particular, some of the changes they've made to make it simpler and faster. And this really comes across, I think, in this slide here. You'll see here the increase from 2019 to 2020. We asked employers, do you consider Canada's immigration policy to be more favorable than that of the US? And last year we had just under 2/3, 65% said yes. They recognize that Canada's policy is more favorable, and now that's jumped up to almost 3/4, to 74%. And so really a stark recognition here that Canada is an easier place to hire foreign nationals, and it's something that's been recognized in those earlier charts we just saw in terms of the amount of interest in Canada, and we're certainly seeing that ourselves among our own client base. Good. Well, that wraps up the 6 sort of core insights we wanted to focus on in today's webinar. But there is, of course, a much more detailed immigration trends report that Dick referenced at the start that has dozens and dozens of charts and a lot of rich data. Would definitely encourage you to download that report. You can get that from our website, and you can download the full 2020 report, which will have all of that information in it. And as I mentioned earlier, we think it's a terrific resource, not only to see what's happening in the broader landscape, but also to help you think about policies that may help your organization, whether it's green card policies or how you think about which elements you pay for, which elements the employee pays for, etc. Some really useful benchmarking information in there as well. And let me now turn back over to Eric to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Manu and DB, for going over these 6 trends. And as Manu just mentioned, the floor is now open for questions. So if you do have a question, please type it in and we'll try to get to it. I do want to be mindful of the time, so we will likely go a few minutes over if that's okay with everyone. So as you wait for questions to come in, I just have a few final housekeeping slides. As DB mentioned at the top of the hour, we do have another webinar tomorrow afternoon, regarding the coronavirus and the implications for employers to consider. But then we also have 2 more webinars following that on March 25th and March 31st. So hope to see everyone on 1, 2, or all of these webinars. And then also, as mentioned at the top of the hour, please subscribe for notifications and alerts as they come out. And don't forget to follow us on social media. And finally, we have the SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. These will also be sent out tomorrow afternoon, but if you would like to take a moment to copy them down now, please feel free to. Okay, so with questions, Sorry for any awkward pauses. Just going through the questions here. It looks like we got through most of them through the main presentation. So I guess Manu, DB, are there any final closing remarks before we sign off?
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time. Obviously, very busy times and very concerning times for so many of us. Thank you for your time. We hope you gained insight from us. Let us know if we can help. We're very focused on providing timely, thoughtful counsel regarding the current pandemic. Thank you, and please avail yourselves to our resources.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you, DB and Manu, for the presentation today. And thank you to all of our attendees. And please stay safe, and we'll see you and have a good rest of your Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.